There is a truly absurd level of evidence proving that the man in yellow is not an elder god or an eldritch being like Cthulhu, but that he is in fact something completely different in every way.
This didn't have to happen. Back the fuck up!
This right here is one of the biggest clues that not only is the man in yellow not an eldritch being like Cthulhu, but that he is entirely a human being. One of the most obvious signs of this obviously being the case is that the man in yellow is capable of walking in the daylight, something that we have never seen from any of the Nightwalkers. He also blocked Jim Matthews' attempt to attack him, despite the fact that he was merely using a wooden stick. But in comparison, we regularly see the Nightwalkers tanking bullets like they're nothing but trash, even at point-blank range. And all of this makes sense, because the man in yellow is clearly not a Nightwalker, and more than likely he has never been a Nightwalker. Hence why he even has the ability to walk in the day in the first place. This is very simple logic that we know for a fact is clearly true because of what we see happening in this very same scene with the man in yellow and Jim Matthews.
I did try to warn you. Your wife shouldn't have dug that hole, Jim.
There is something that happens in this scene that a lot of people never even noticed, which clearly hints at the man in yellow merely just being a human being as opposed to an elder god or eldritch being like Cthulhu. And that is, unlike what we see repeatedly from the Nightwalkers, the man in yellow does not transform before killing Jim Matthews. And while you can come up with all sorts of reasons as to why he didn't, I would ask you to consider something much more simple rather than contorting yourself to come up with an excuse. And that is, why do you believe that the man in yellow has the ability to transform in the first place? Because let me tell you right now, there's not a single piece of evidence in this entire story proving that he has the ability to do that. And I would actually argue the exact opposite, that there is no reason to believe whatsoever that the yellow man is anything more than a human being. Like, think about this. Have you ever considered that the reason he was walking around in the day as opposed to nighttime is because he himself is afraid of being attacked by the Nightwalkers? And this is just one of the many pieces of evidence showing that he is in fact a human being, something proven beyond a shadow of a doubt by this scene that I am about to show you next.
You ever wonder if Abby was right? What'd you say? My blood is your blood now.
This scene gives us some of the most obvious evidence that the man in yellow is merely just a human being. And I am not even convinced that he has ever been what we refer to as a monster in the context of this story at any point whatsoever. Because I've seen a lot of people using this moment when the man in yellow effortlessly overpowers Jim Matthews, who's at least 3 decades younger than him, as proof of the man in yellow being the entity in control of the monsters. But what you have clearly forgotten is that the old man chained up in the dungeon, who may have been experiencing torture from all the way back in the 1860s up to the current storyline, completely overpowered Boyd like he was an ant. And there's actually a lot hinting at him actually having been a real person who infected Boyd with the worms simply because he was tired of being tortured by the entity in control of the monsters, who is also the same being that sends Boyd into the dungeon, specifically knowing in advance that Boyd would not kill the old man, and therefore Boyd could be used to smuggle the worms back into the population of Fromville. Like, basically what I'm saying right now is that both the old man in the dungeon and the yellow man were able to overpower each of their opponents because they have the ability to move objects with their mind. And whether you believe it or not, there's actually a substantial amount of evidence showing that this is in fact an ability existing in the From universe. And this is why what I'm about to show you is so significant to understanding who the yellow man is, where he came from, and why he is entirely human.
Julie, he needs the rope.
This scene right here is one of the biggest pieces of evidence that the man in yellow was never a monster like the music box, the cicadas, and he is obviously nothing like the Nightwalkers. Because what we see here is that Julie was able to throw the rope down the well despite the fact that it was only her consciousness that was present at that moment, as her physical body was having a seizure back at the ruins. So what I'm trying to say here is that Storywalkers clearly possess telekinesis, which would mean as long as their consciousness is present at a specific location, they can still move objects with their mind, regardless of the location of their physical body. This explains why the kimono demon was able to completely overpower Fatima in the root cellar, why Jade could not release himself from the grip of the colonial man, and how the ballerina was able to hold down Boyd as if he was a baby in the hospital. This is also obviously how the entity in control of the monsters was able to crush that house like a pancake while trying to kill Jim Matthews. And of course, this explains how a possibly 150-plus-year-old man who had been experiencing torture for almost that entire time was able to effortlessly overpower Boyd with one arm. But most importantly, it explains how the man in yellow was able to lift up Jim Matthews with so much force that Jim Matthews could not release himself from the man in yellow's grip. So what I'm trying to say conclusively is that there is no proof of the man in yellow being any less human than what Julie will eventually become by the end of this story. And that is why I want you to pay very close attention to what I'm going to show you in this next scene.
She was the one who had been chosen to free the children. Others were chosen before her. She could see each and every one.
This scene makes it very clear that an obvious truth that most people choose to ignore is clearly true and factual. Because what we see here is that the man in yellow has grown significantly older than what he used to be more than 40 years ago when these paintings were made. And this obviously backs up the other pieces of evidence, showing that he is clearly not an immortal being. And I will explain why the situation with the boy in white is completely different to whatever it is that's going on with the man in yellow, and the reasons why will become very apparent in this very same video. All of the abilities that the man in yellow has are clearly derived from him being a story walker just like Julie. And we obviously know that he is in fact one of them because he specifically knew Julie would be there before she arrived. Hence why he chose to attack Jim Matthews at this specific moment. Even him possibly being able to turn invisible is something possessed by other story walkers like the kimono demon, who clearly also has that ability. And of course, it's clearly demonstrated by the boy in white when Tabitha was at the lighthouse. And this brings me into one of the most obvious reasons why the man in yellow is nowhere even close to being as powerful as an eldritch being like Cthulhu.
Mom's in an ambulance. You have to help her.
Who are you talking to?
Should be watching Julie and Ethan.
You leave my children alone.
But they're not your children anymore.
This scene here is one of the biggest mistakes people make when trying to determine who the man in yellow actually is. Because I see a lot of people falsely attributing the abilities of Jim Matthews' dead baby that was on the telephone to the man in yellow because he admitted to calling Jim Matthews on the radio. Despite the fact that there's so much evidence showing that these two are completely different beings. One of the most obvious signs is that the voice on the radio was a grown man, which matches up with the man in yellow claiming that he was the one who called Jim Matthews. But this is where you always make a mistake. The man in yellow never said that he was the one pretending to be the dead baby that was calling Jim Matthews, which makes perfect sense because it's literally just the boy in white using his normal voice. That's it. It's that simple. That explains why this voice knew when Tabitha was coming back to the town, because the boy is the one who brought her back in the first place. And he's also the one who told the Nightwalkers that she was going to be coming back so that they can set a trap in preparation for her arrival. As it is right now, it's very clear to me that the man in yellow is working against the boy in white, who is the entity in control of the monsters. That's why he was warning Jim Matthews to stop his wife from following the script as it's been written by the entity in control of the monsters, something that we know very well as the being who appears as the boy in white. Because he himself, the yellow man, was also deceived by the entity. And this is something we know for a fact. Because whether you believe it or not, it's literally stated by the writers of the story itself that the man in yellow is merely just a human being that was deceived by demons.
You have the most fantastic story about your inspiration for the man in yellow.
Years ago, I saw this man in a canary yellow suit. He had a matching fedora, and he was just dancing and moving with such joy it felt magical, like to the point where like I couldn't take my eyes off him as I drove by.
Now, this is how we know with 100% certainty that the man in yellow is nothing more than a human being. That's it. Compared to elder gods and eldritch beings like Cthulhu, the yellow man is nothing more than an ant. Like literally just looking at that giant octopus known as Cthulhu makes a human being completely lose their mind and go crazy. That is how powerful Cthulhu is in comparison to the man in yellow. Even the red jellyfish who likely created the town itself is nowhere near that powerful, let alone the man in yellow. He also does not have black eyes. His eyebrow ridge is just very defined, and I know this to be true because he looks the exact same way even in other shows.
Flash forward to maybe 5 years later, and I see the same man, same yellow suit. It's tattered and it's worn. All the joy has been washed out of him, and he had gone on this quest and he had somehow failed or he had lost.
So the way I see it right now, the man in yellow is more than likely just meant to be a parallel to either Boyd or Jim Matthews, likely even both of them at the same time. He was clearly trapped in the town at one point or another, and he ended up being manipulated into playing the entity's sick games, just like the same thing that happens to everyone in the town. If I had to guess, I'd say he was tricked into sacrificing his son, who I'd assume is actually Smiley. Hence why the man in yellow was helping the entity in control of the monsters to resurrect this demon in the first place. And he was obviously completely broken as a result of sacrificing his own son. And that's when he became the demonic-looking being that he is right now. That's just one obvious possibility. Because do you really think that the devil, Cthulhu, Pastor, the king in yellow, or whoever the fuck you believe he is would actually be walking around dressed in rags like a homeless man while making sure that his servants, the Nightwalkers, are always super clean and pristine? Come on, man. It's obvious who's in control of this town, and it is not the yellow man. Look at how the kimono demon and the boy in white dress like, and then compare it to the man in yellow's rags. It's laughable how delusional people are about this guy's position in the hierarchy of Fromland.
Stop! Can't do that.
Why won't you help us? All those years you look the same.
Everything's changing now.
The boy in white getting older means that he's only now going through puberty. Basically, the entity we've been dealing with this entire time was one that hadn't even reached the physical prime of his demonic life. But on the other hand, the yellow man has likely been living far beyond the limits of his own. Because the boy in white was able to invade Elgin's dreams and therefore his mind, this means that the boy in white is telepathic, which naturally explains how the dead baby was able to call Jim Matthews from a telephone that is not connected to any wires or even electricity at all. And it also explains how this being was able to restrict the ringing of the telephone to very specific people as opposed to everyone being able to hear it, which is obviously the normally expected result from the ringing of a telephone. In comparison, the radio built by Jim Matthews was actually real, functioning, and connected to electricity, which is why it was a threat to the entity in the first place, which is something that we know for a fact because the entity in control of the monsters specifically summons a storm to destroy the radio in the first place. So what I'm trying to say here is that the man in yellow answering Jim Matthews' radio call does not necessarily have to be something supernatural. He could have been using his own real radio to respond to the also real radio call that was being made by Jim Matthews at that same time. However, I will say, regardless of what the writers originally intended him to be when they created him, they'll probably end up making him more powerful simply because of his insane popularity. Like, even when it comes to Smiley in particular, there's actually a lot in these recent seasons showing that he may actually be the entity in control of the monsters himself. So watch this video next to understand why the kimono demon was bowing at Smiley's resurrection.